Hey guys, daskro here. I sat down with Luetin, another Battlefield commentator, to talk about gadgets. Gadgets in Battlefield 3, gadgets in Battlefield 4, what we hope to expect in future Battlefield titles. I hope you guys enjoy. I know it's a bit long, but I hope you guys enjoy regardless.
Hi guys, it's Luetin here, and I'm joined by daskro today, and we're going to be talking about gadgets on Battlefield. Now, obviously, Battlefield 3 is kind of coming up towards its conclusion. Endgame has been, announced as pretty much the last DLC now. So we're thinking a bit more about the future and what could be in Battlefield 4. But we're just kind of having a bit of a fun discussion around gadgets mainly that could appear in the game. Some vehicle gadgets, some personnel gadgets, and daskro's going to take it on here and explain a little bit more about that.
Yeah, there's a number of gadgets out there in real life used by armed forces across the world, and what Battlefield really tries to do is incorporate the concepts of these gadgets into the game. They do it much better than any other sort of game of its type. And it's important to recognize, though, that Battlefield as a game utilizes these gadgets, but they incorporate it into the game mechanics so that it's engaging and it's intuitive, but they do it often at the expense of realism. So as an example, the M142 HIMARS that we saw in Armored Kill, it could take out a city block, no kidding. It could launch its missiles, and it could take out most of Grand Bazaar as a map in one blow and kill everyone. But it doesn't actually do that in the game. That's okay, because we have to create a balanced and engaging and fun experience. So taking in what these systems are in real life and how they exist in their models and things like that, and bringing them in and making them more accessible is really what DICE is trying to do. So many of the ideas that Luetin or myself will talk about are going to be within those constraints. There are going to be certain things we're going to talk about that will have to be sort of nerfed, compared to their real-life counterparts, because they simply would be too powerful otherwise. Or likewise, make more powerful because they may have lost relevancy in recent time.
I think because one of the things that we talked about mainly, and you guys might remember, I did a long video and a whole breakdown, a huge discussion talking about the ECM in jets. I was talking to daskro about this previously before we began this, and we were talking about the whole thing of aircraft countermeasures, and something that people often forget in game when they're talking about flares or ECM or which one is better or they're overpowered or they don't work correctly. The thing that people forget is that in reality, aircraft will be equipped with multiple different countermeasure systems, and when you're talking about a piece of hardware that costs millions of dollars, the objective is to not allow this thing to go down. So these systems are in place to prevent any chance of these aircraft being taken out, and you can just apply that to so many different situations. In reality, a lot of the equipment, a lot of the gadgets are designed to be completely imbalanced, because why would you want your enemy to have any kind of advantage towards you? They are designed to maximize advantage in every possible way. In some situations, in a completely over-the-top way, the enemy will have no chance whatsoever of perhaps even seeing you, let alone having a chance to fight back against you. And so when you start talking about gadgets and things to bring into the game, it's important to remember that when you transfer something from real life into the game, it has to be changed and modelled accordingly so that it can actually be fun to be in the game. Because if you're in the game and you're getting taken out from a mile away, that's not enjoyable for anyone. And there's a lot of different systems that you can kind of apply that to. So, daskro, where should we go with this? Do you want to start off with the first one?
Sure. The first one that I want to talk about is the idea of putting bombs on the aircraft that we see in this game. And what I mean by that is when the aircraft like the F-18 or the Su-35, when they engage ground targets, they're using air-to-ground missiles like a Hellfire or a Maverick, and they engage at small distances. But what I'd like to see is some kind of ability where they can drop some kind of precision-guided munition, a 1,000-pound, 500-pound, or a 2,000-pound bomb. Now, these bombs are almost an order of magnitude more destructive than what a Hellfire missile would have. A Hellfire missile has roughly 20 kilograms of explosive. Compare that to a 2,000-pound bomb, which is substantially more. Even with a 1,000-pound bomb, that would be enough explosive to level essentially what? Close to 20 to 30 meters in radius, just from the blast damage. That would be a 30-meter deep crater and then you'd have another 60 meters of lethal kill radius. That would be like destroying the entire Charlie Point on Karg Island. And so that, I mean, clearly that has to be tempered. It would have to be brought down. But I'd like to see some kind of tandem ability where a recon guy has some kind of SOFLAM and can GPS guide a target as opposed to laser guide a target. And it can even be like a static target on the map. It doesn't necessarily have to even be a bad guy. It can be destroy that building, and then in 30 seconds, you can then lock onto it and drop that bomb, and then in a minute from there, the bomb can drop. I think that'd be really cool.
I think it definitely would, and I think that something that annoys me sometimes is that you can only designate targets that are, live, like vehicles. And buildings, for example, is a really, really good one. Now, obviously, you can mark enemies, so they can see soldiers on the ground that are marked, so an aircraft may know, all right, there's people down here. Now, obviously, in an ideal situation, you can be able to communicate to everyone in your team, but we all know that, unless you're in a highly competitive situation, that's not always going to be the case. But that doesn't necessarily mean that the people on your team are not unresponsive. It just may mean that they are not in the optimized means of communicating with you. So being able to designate a building and say, there's guys in here, we can't see them, but we know they're there and we need that building taken down, then yeah, sure, that's going to be something to take out. But actually, it kind of brings me on to another side thought right here is, would this not be the ideal thing for a commander role? Because, if you have guys on the ground and they're all designating multiple different targets, I mean, if you have a tank, then 3 or 4 different guys can designate that tank. So, it doesn't matter. The tank's still there. It's, whatever. If you have 4 different guys, but they're all designating different buildings, that could be really confusing. And I think this comes back to the whole thing of commander. If we have the commander role brought back into Battlefield in Battlefield 4, it will give one person the ability to communicate with people on the ground and and then relay information to other elements of the team. So I think actually, a little bit of a sidetrack here, but I think it kind of will tie into a lot of things that we would talk about, is this idea of having someone who can help communicate information to everyone on the team. And I think that would tie in really well. And I think, like you said, that would help balance it a little bit, because they could use that in a kind of measured way. But also, it's going to come down to the choice of the pilot. Are they going to want to be engaging people on the ground? Are they going to be wanting to solo, just take out people in the air? Is that going to be their mission to do that? So I think it's going to be a piece of equipment that will need to be balanced, but, it's definitely an interesting choice.
And I think that the commander mode would definitely facilitate this kind of engagement. There's a few other types of systems out there that would do very similar capabilities. So, for instance, naval fire support. This idea that you have these destroyers, like in Wake Island, for instance, that are sort of out in the back of the map, but you could use their 5-inch guns and rain down fire on a given target. Or even traditional howitzer support using 105 millimeter cannons.
Those are big guns.
Being able to engage those, but like all fire support, they're area weapons meant to destroy very large swaths, and they're not going to be that accurate. And I like the idea of a commander or even a recon guy being able to say, "Hey, you're engaging 50 meters too short," and then having to take their rangefinder or whatever it may be and say, "Okay, it looks like 50 meters, they need to go this direction," and then they can relay that 50-meter information to those guns, and then 15, 20 seconds later, a new set of shells rain down and destroy their intended targets. I really like that idea. I think that'd be really cool to sort of have as engagement.
I like the idea of, I think what you would have to have with this and with the aircraft bombs, they would have to have kind of pinpoint accuracy and then high splash damage. So the idea that when it lands, if it hits on target, it's a kill. So if you hit that tank or whatever, if you hit that building on target with the bomb or with the cannon from the ship or whatever it is that you're firing, okay, so we're talking about these kind of larger bombardment weapons. If it hits on target, that is extreme. It's extreme. It's out because of the amount that you're putting onto that target. However, you couldn't have a weapon that literally, as it landed, destroyed everything in like a 30-meter radius. It would be too powerful. But I like the idea that when people talk about mortars now, and I remember this only yesterday, we were in a game and there was one of our teammates sitting at the back mortaring, and a couple of the guys in my team were like, "Oh, this guy's mortaring, he's just wasting time, he should be fighting." And I said, no, I said, leave him be. I said, if it's just one guy, it's not like there's 3 people sitting back there, it's just one guy. I said, a mortar, even if you're not picking up kills, can be a very irritating and distracting piece of equipment, because if you're on the other end of that, these mortars are landing on you, they're creating a huge amount of vibration, you can't aim properly, there's things blowing up, and also the key point is if you don't move, they will actually kill you. Okay, most of the time people don't get killed by mortars or whatever because they move, and they move away from that area very quickly, and that is the benefit of those tools, is it creates a kind of a fear factor. You know, they're like, Christ, we're taking mortars, we need to get out of here. And I think it would be the same way with that, with aircraft or by other kind of artillery. If it starts landing on you, you're like, Christ, we've really got to get out of here, and that is the kind of deterrent with it. I think the only problem I would have with something like a ship bombardment is, how would you take that out? Would it be destructible by aircraft? Could you counter it in some way? If it's an aircraft, you can shoot it down, but if it's mounted on a ship or something like that, how is, you know, an enemy team going to handle that, basically?
Yeah, that'd be a good question. And further, to talk about the effect of these kind of weapons, I think that it's important to recognize that the reason why a helicopter is in theater engaging tanks with a Hellfire as opposed to an F-18 or an Su-35 engaging with a bomb is because of the time equation. You can fire a Hellfire and engage a target at a much shorter distance, and the sort of time between you choose to engage that target versus when you actually get that kill is much shorter than what you would if you asked for fire support from artillery or drop a precision guided munition. And so I like the idea of having a delay with these kinds of systems, so that it's not as if you can change the destination of where those artillery are gonna hit mid-course. Instead, it's, I've made a decision to hit this target. There may be guys there, there may not be guys there. And it may be 15, 20, 30 seconds after you choose. And so it requires a really intelligent and individual with a good amount of situation awareness to know that I need to have this kind of fire support here in 30 seconds. That's sort of where I think it'd be cool. But you are right that I think that with naval fire support, you'd have to create some kind of mechanism to stop it.
What about this? What about if, you know, I think, again, if it was for an individual person on the ground, like a gadget, for them to be able to call that in, that isn't going to work, because if you've got 20 people on a team, 30, you know, or whatever, if you're in a 64-player game, if you're in a 32-player game, you know, you're not going to be able to have everyone having access to that device, because how is that going to work? It just won't. The only way that you could really do it would be to, again, have a kind of single commander mode, or, okay, but this would be, it wouldn't really work, because if you had someone on the deck, it would waste a lot of their time. What I'm talking about is having a massive cooldown on it, all right? So it's a very powerful tool, but it has a 10-minute cooldown or something like that. So,
10 minutes.
Yeah,
Wow.
10 minutes. Yeah, but think how long. If you're in a proper game of Battlefield that's hard fought and you have a good ticket count, it can last a long time. Some games, sure, you'll be done in 10 minutes, but depending on what kind of, I mean, maybe it'd be less. Okay, but I'm just kind of, you know, bumping ideas around here. It has a long cooldown, which means that you have to pick and choose when you use it. You can't just sit in it like some people will sit in the miniguns or whatever, and, you know, not the SRAM or whatever, CRAM. You can't just sit back in it and just shoot down things. All right, you have to kind of, it's a tool to use at specific moments in the battle, and you go, okay, this is a real key problem right now. And think about it, when you play, you do have these moments where nothing seems to work. I mean, I've played games literally this week where our team has not been a bad team, they're not been the best team either, but they've had moments where they kind of come to a kind of brick wall, and they're trying to get in from the left, the right, they've got tanks, they're trying to do everything, and they just can't seem to get through. This would be a time to use that tool to kind of soften them up and then push through, okay? So that's the kind of thing that I'm thinking of. It's just a kind of extra tool. On the other side of things, do attackers really need extra tools in Battlefield? I don't know, because you know, attackers seem to do very, very well all the time. Right.
But that's a very good point, because these kind of gadgets and these abilities are really about giving people options of how to counter situations where there may be a perceived imbalance. Philosophically, I believe that there should never be a situation where you cannot use some kind of hard counter to stop a prevailing tactic that's being utilized. And so, as an example, in Battlefield right now, if you have some really proficient helicopter and fighter pilots up in the air that are on the enemy team, even if you got a guy who is good with the CRAM, you're not going to be able to take them out easily. You really aren't, because they're going to base rape your aircraft and air assets. You try to get a Stinger out, but they're going to use their ECM and flares, and they're going to hug the ground when necessary, and they're going to use the terrain to their advantage to stop any Stingers from hitting them. And it becomes this really terrible situation where you may, no kidding, dedicate 10 guys with Stingers try to take these aircraft, these 3 guys up an aircraft, and you still can't take them out.
Yeah,
to me, that is a imbalance that can be corrected if you were to either tweak existing gadgets and perks, but or incorporate new ones.
Let's talk a bit about this, because we're kind of on the vehicle topic, so maybe we can talk about vehicles now and then move into sort of more infantry things as we go along. Now, one of my things was to do with these missile and countermeasure systems, and it's interesting that you talk about this idea of not being able to take them out. It's something that I have talked about a lot. I've talked about it with Level Cap a lot, and me and Level both said that we wouldn't be sorry to see aircraft like jets taken out of the next battlefield. Now, on the other hand, I could live with it. You know, it's not the end of the world. I just think that personally, I found that what I would rather have is a few more helicopter options. I talked about this in the last roundtable I did, and Matimio kind of agreed as well. They would be more interesting to have. I mean, we have the scout helicopters, we have the attack helicopters, we have the transport copters. Okay, so there's Venom, you know. But I kind of like the idea of having perhaps a couple of different attack, so maybe have 2 attack helis, 2 scouts, and 2, you know, transport varieties designed for different roles. So the attack helicopters would be optimized for sort of air to air and then light ground attacks, or heavy ground and light air. So they're all kind of basically different loadouts, different builds, but then perhaps the helicopters themselves are designed to handle differently, because I'm sure that's the case that you get, you know, I mean, a lot of vehicles have different handling. I have to say as well, I think that I always feel that in Battlefield the helicopters don't handle as well as they could. When you see helicopters in real life, they're extremely maneuverable, and I always feel that in Battlefield the helicopters are a bit of a pain. They're really having to, like, you know, pull them hard to get, you know, any kind of maneuverability out of them, whereas I really think they could be lightened up, but that's a different issue really. But yeah, this whole issue of them being imbalanced, it's a really hard one, and I'll tell you why it's a difficult one for me. Is because at the end of the day, if someone is such an excellent pilot, and let's face it, it's not like every game you play you have an astonishing pilot in. There are plenty of people who cannot fly at all, or fly badly, or are moderate to proficient but not excellent. Then you get these guys come along, and yeah, they're unstoppable. The thing that I find really hard, and people often sort of say, you know, oh, you just want it one way, Luetin. No, I don't. I would be happy to see jets taken out, but on the other hand, I don't know whether I feel comfortable punishing someone who clearly has spent time getting really, really good at that thing to do. And I'll be honest, I'm not the best jet pilot. So for me, you know, I really appreciate people that can fly that well, because clearly they have got a skill there. And I wonder whether we should be punishing these people who are really, really good. Now, I was in a game just this week where there was this guy, and he was in the frog foot. He was unstoppable. He would take any jet down as soon as it got in the air. He was absolutely destroying our vehicles because he had the rocket pod gun combo, and he'd be like laying down rocket pods at distance and then finishing them off with a gun. There was nothing you could do about it. You couldn't outrun him, you couldn't repair it. He would just destroy everything. And it just meant that he had complete domination of the entire battlefield. We had 4 to 5 guys trying to take him down with stingers. As soon as anyone would get a stinger in the air, he would just flare it, and then he'd fly off at distance out of range of lock, and then he'd wait, and then he'd come back, and he was just doing that. And I've been in so many battles where people do the drop, flare and evade maneuver, so that if you're in a jet, they'll just drop a flare and then they'll escape. And like you say, there is nothing that you can do about it.
Well, I think you're right about that, and the way I sort of view it is from a tanker's perspective. I do a lot of vehicle stuff when I play my games, and what I notice what happens is that if I'm particularly dominating in the vehicle, what ends up happening is that if there's no air assets that are going to be a problem for me, the enemy team is going to put a lot more people to engineers and throw a lot more RPGs and SMAs at me. And even if I have a fantastic tank crew with me, it actually forces me to not push certain areas and not engage certain areas, because I know that even with a great crew, I'm going to go down and go down fast. And I think that with the aircraft in Battlefield 3, if they were to change the mechanic of ECM or a flare, so as opposed to simply taking every stinger that's in the air and and relegate it to uselessness writ large. Instead, it only took out one or two in the air, or its effectiveness time was perhaps 1/3 of what it is. It would then create a situation where, okay, I can use my ECM or my flare to stop one or two Stinger missiles, but if that enemy team dedicates 4 to 5 guys or even 3 guys to Stinger, and I expose myself, then I'm going down. That's the kind of thing that I think could change this and still make it balanced and still reward those highly proficient pilots that are out there, because I want to reward people that have put a lot of time and effort into honing their skill and playing the game. And I think the best way to do that is to force the other team to dedicate more of their resources to take that air asset out. If they dedicate more resources taking that air asset, it means they have less resources to take out the enemy tanks. They have less resources to engage enemy infantry, and that's the kind of thing that I want to happen. I want teams to have to make compromised choices of what they need to go in order to win the game.
And where this leads us on to kind of quite nicely is that, like I said, I kind of did a whole period when I was starting to do YouTube about YouTube Battlefield about countermeasures, because it was something that interested me, and it still kind of interests me. There's different aspects that interest me about it. One is the difference from reality to how they actually appear in the game. Flares, for example, there are different types of flares. It's not just flares. There are completely different types of flares that operate in different ways, different, to counter different types of missile. ECM, again, is a different thing to how it really operates in the game. In game, it seems to it'll break locks, but it also seems to drop these clouds, which are reminiscent of chaff clouds, which are designed to, distract radar missiles, not heat-seeking missiles, as some people kind of talked about before. But as I say, the whole thing of how they work in reality and how they work in game is kind of by the by. It doesn't really matter. What matters is just what they have chosen and what effect they're really trying to have it in the game. What I would really like to see, for one thing, there's a lot of talk about kind of people breaking locks and escaping, and you can't possibly take them down. Now, people often forget very quickly that in Bad Company 2 we had a missile called the AT-4, and this was you could physically guide the missile, and many times this would save people from helicopters who could not be locked onto. They'd get tracer dart, they'd have cargo stabs coming at them, but they would still be able to evade using the smoke. Now, or they could just remove the tracer dart. That was it, wasn't it, in Bad Company 2? When you got tracered, you could just drop the smoke, immediately you can't be locked again.
That's right.
It was a very good system. However, if you had an AT-4 and you had a good person shooting it, you could take these things down. Now, helicopters, I think, would be doable. Could you take out a jet with an AT-4? I think that's a little bit questionable.
Well, maybe. I mean, what's kind of interesting about that is that the AT-4 as a portable system isn't made to take out enemy aircraft.
No.
But it's an anti-tank weapon, and it doesn't have that kind of guidance that we do see in Bad Company 2.
It'd be fly-by-wire, really, isn't it? That's what it would be.
But here's the thing, is that with the ASRAD, the new Humvee with rockets in in-game, they make a variant of ASRAD made by Saab with the RBS-70 anti-aircraft missile. Here's how the RBS-70 anti-aircraft missile works in real life. It, no kidding, has a seeker on its backside near the engine, and it looks to see where a laser is being pointed from the user who shoots it. And that laser is either guided by a person himself or by a turret that is tracking a enemy air or cruise missile. And what it can do is that missile is completely indifferent to whether that aircraft has ECM or shaft or flare or anything around those lines. As long as it can see that laser that is behind it, and it rides that laser to wherever it needs to engage, and then you can destroy the target. And so those kinds of systems actually do exist in real life, because like you just described, those are actual issues that do come up in these kinds of military engagements. And there's solutions out there, and that'd be a really cool solution to have in a future Battlefield series, is that kind of thing where you can use all the chaff and ECM and flares that you like in the aircraft, but if that guy who's firing it can keep his reticle on your aircraft, then you're done. I think
Yeah.
that's pretty cool.
Yeah, and I like the idea that perhaps these kind of things could even be incorporated into the aircraft themselves. Now, at the moment, there's a fairly limited kind of look ability when you're actually in aircraft. You can do it, but it's not really that perfect.
It's not easy.
No, and the idea of being able to be, in your jet and have some kind of laser guided, fly-by-wire system to be able to lock on to other aircraft, not lock on, you wouldn't be locking on at all, but the idea that you could look towards it. Now, we all remember from the single player, we had the second pilot, the gunner. Now, I don't know, it's not a gadget, but it would be kind of interesting that if we have these kind of larger scale, maybe if they brought air superiority into Battlefield 4 from the word go instead of right at the end, who knows? Again, we're talking about the idea of having different vehicles as well. It would be kind of cool to have a twin-seated aircraft, especially if it was on air superiority mode, and you really would have to be working as a coherent team on both sides to be able to counter kind of different things. And I think this is the thing is, perhaps we're looking at this the wrong way. We're constantly looking at it from let's say you're in Rush and you have 2 aircraft, or you're on Conquest and you've only got 4 aircraft, and they're kind of fighting amongst one another. And it kind of brings me on to what we were going to be talking about, which was these idea of different countermeasures. Now, currently we have ECM and flares. I would quite like the idea of having ECM to break locks and locks only, okay? It will remove a lock and it will break a tracking lock, okay, and prevent you from being locked onto, all right? I like the idea that ECM would just do that, okay? It won't make a launched missile miss, and this is the thing, I want it to do a specific role and just do that role. Then you would have flares for heat-seeking missiles, and then you would have chaff for radar-guided missiles, okay? And this was the thing, I like the idea of bringing in 2 different missile types. Right now we just have heat-seeking missiles. I would like to, apart from obviously the ground-locking missiles, which are still kind of the same, but not.
Yes, they are.
They're just sort of operating a slightly different way, but they're still working in the same kind of mechanic, basically. What I would like to see is a radar-guided missile, and for those of you that guys that don't know, the 2 most common are kind of infrared and radar, okay? Infrared guided missiles will track heat sources emitted by the target, but radar guided missiles emit radiation and track the reflected energy. And this way, these missiles are essentially miniature radar systems. So chaff will deflect radar missiles, and ECM will prevent initial tracking and training, sort of locks, as it were. Let's think about this. If you had different missile systems, perhaps you could build a loadout. Perhaps they could change the aircraft so that they were really, tailored. You could choose real different loadouts, different countermeasure systems, and so on, to really make it more interesting and really allow you to kind of build up an aircraft rather than just having these kind of come one, come all, do-it-yourself systems where you just drop it and it'll take anything off of you, which I kind of feel is a little bit kind of lazy in many ways. I perhaps like the idea of not having jets in Rush, but they are in Conquest. That way, people would know, hey, if I want some rounds where I don't have to worry about jets kicking me around, I can go into Rush and that will just be some helicopter and ground combat. If we go into Conquest, which is generally a larger arena, a larger theatre anyway, those kind of situations to me sound like a lot more suitable. I've always kind of questioned why they put jets into Rush, because Conquest is such a larger scale engagement anyway. The idea of having jets and stuff flying around seems to make a lot more sense, whereas on Rush you have these very small areas, and I think that would really be interesting, combined with adding some of these different changes in,
I think you're right. The jets in Rush gameplay are a bit questionable at times. I think the helicopters are much more appropriate. And I think the jets are great for Conquest. Yeah. And I really like your idea of having different air-to-air loadouts. One of the things that I'd love to see in a future Battlefield game are AMRAAMs or AIM-120Ds. These are advanced medium-range air-to-air missiles. Missiles that are radar-guided and engage at much longer distances. They lock on at longer distances, and they can travel a much farther distance relative to a Sidewinder or a Stinger missile. And I like the idea that you would have this AMRAAM that would be launched from your aircraft, and it's not necessarily that much fast. It's actually probably slower than a Stinger or a Sidewinder. I like the idea that it's slower because you can outmaneuver it, and that's cool and all. But if there's a lot of them out there, and you don't have that chaff as one of your gadgets, then it's going to keep on following you. And if you don't keep track of it, it may end up hitting you after all because you get lazy, or you run into it because you're doing all these maneuvers, getting around, things like that. I would love to see that kind of thing out there where you have these different options of air-to-air loadouts, and it requires the jets to have a little bit more situational awareness of different types of missiles that are coming at them, what type of missiles, and how they can go about countering them.
Yeah, I agree. And I think something else that I hear all the time is that people are always going, oh, lock-on missiles, they're so crap, they're so... Because basically people consider them to be, you know, too easy. You just literally aim roughly towards your target and it locks on for you. I say don't take those out. Go the other way. Make it more interesting with the same pieces of equipment. So let's have different types of missile. Let's have different types of countermeasure. Let's make that system work but more interesting. You can't be having a game that's set in the current time period and not have these systems. It would be stupid. You may as well just not have them. Okay, people that want just literally manually guided stuff, or stuff that requires the pilot to be able to hit that on, you know, it's just, it doesn't make sense. It wouldn't make sense. So you can't have that. But I say let's take the current systems that we have, the lock-on systems, but make them more interesting. Make it so you have to have more choices. Take your idea of having some that drive more slowly, but you can't break a lock. You have to evade them, so that you have these different systems in place. So perhaps, you know, maybe some lock on more quickly. So perhaps your kind of slower moving system that can't be broken, but can be evaded, but maybe it locks on more quickly. So instead of having, you know, take 5 seconds to go beep, 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 beep before you can fire, it literally, as soon as you see that, it's like, deed, click, and off it goes. You know, so it's that kind of thing. I like the idea of having these kind of different missile systems. So taking almost the kind of the balances we have between the guns in the game, we have all the different balances with those. Maybe let's start balancing different things. I mean, perhaps, for example, as well, perhaps you could have some missiles that instead of these kind of disables, it really is a one-hit kill, but maybe you have to have a considerably longer lock-on time to be firing it. You know, perhaps maybe that's what the radar missiles would be. Maybe they take a little bit longer to lock on, maybe they have a slightly different speed, maybe they're more powerful, and all these kind of things. So, you know, or you know, maybe you can even load out different elements. Maybe you can load out the guns in your aircraft differently. Maybe have a couple of different options there, so that if you're really good with the guns, you have a few more options and stuff like this. I don't know, but that's another idea there.
Well, I mean, to go on what you were talking about, another idea would be to put external fuel tanks on the aircraft. When these aircraft have external fuel tanks in real life, one of the things that they'll do is that they will drop their external tanks, and they'll do it to lighten their loads so they can maneuver faster, and hopefully they drop it at a low enough altitude they can hopefully get some kind of fireball or other kind of engagement that allows that enemy missile that is heat-seeking to engage the fuel as opposed to engage the aircraft. That'd be some really cool things to do. Now, granted, you'd have to create some kind of sacrifice if you do that. If you drop your tanks, maybe you can't go as fast, or maybe you have to land soon, or you run out of fuel. I don't know, something around those lines. I mean, the point is that we don't have to be constrained by the reality that there's limited fuel capacity on an aircraft. Instead, let's think more about, well, what kind of game dynamics could we incorporate so that when we do want to use this kind of capability, then it can actually do something that's cool and engaging and fun and interesting.
Yeah, I totally agree, and I think there's a lot of different ways that you can really go with it, and I think, to be honest, this is a whole topic that could really be broken down in so many ways. It's kind of interesting. I'd like to go on with it further, but the whole thing of talking about this idea of speed and weight and different loadouts for your vehicles, it does kind of bring me on to one that I kind of wasn't sure if I was going to mention, but actually I do want to mention. The idea that obviously in the field soldiers can carry different kind of protective equipment, but obviously whatever you take with you is going to weigh differently, and it's going to affect your maneuverability and the way that you can move around. Now, I don't know if this is something personally I would actually want in the game, so I'm just kind of mentioning it as a sort of aside, but obviously currently we don't have any kind of system of protection against armament and stuff like this. Now, the difficulty with it is it always comes up against the hated Juggernaut from COD, which people really dislike because people always hated that thing. However, I really see it as a kind of valid and completely appropriate thing to be able to equip with your character. There's no reason why you shouldn't be able to take different types of plating to protect yourself with. I like that idea. what I do think would be necessary is to kind of start employing actual weight into your character, and it would affect your movement. You know, I was very interested, I have to say, with the... I'm just going to bring in a little side note because it kind of applies here. The recent Call of Duty, their Pick 10 system, it was really cool. Now, unfortunately, I took COD back to the store because the servers were just absolutely subpar. I couldn't get any kind of decent games, and the lag compensation was stupid. It was just stupid. It really was stupid. You would die before you could fire a shot. It was insane. However, put all that aside, the Pick 10 thing that they came up with was really cool, this idea that you could really customize your loadout. What I would like to see, which I'm sure won't happen, but what I would like to see is I would like to see him go a step further with it. Okay, I've been very interested in playing the game Dust 514 recently this week. It's a game that's come out just for the PS3, and in short, what Dust 514 is, it's an FPS that's linked to the world of EVE Online. Now, the one key thing that's really cool about this is that when you're setting up your character, you can actually choose different pieces of equipment, and they affect your maneuverability because you have a scout kit, for example, which is light, allows you to move fast. You have heavier kits, which are better armoured, but they slow you down because they weigh more and you're less manoeuvrable. So I like the idea that when you go into Battlefield, you really are kind of setting up your character, tailoring it more. You don't just choose a gun and you choose a gadget, which is kind of, I guess really this is kind of leading more towards where do we want Battlefield to go, which is a question in itself. But, you know, just on this idea of customizing, it's kind of a cool idea that you could really customize your character more. You could choose different pieces of armament, and if you imagine, if you will, you might have like key stats bars, so your character's weight, speed, his maneuverability, how many pieces of equipment he can carry based on other, you know, if he has like a weight limit, okay, then he can only carry a certain piece of kit. So does he want to have more guns? Does he want to have better armor? So he has to kind of balance up the amount of stuff that he can take. And then it's not just a case of how much he can carry, but then also it's going to affect his other, you know, his stats as a soldier. So the more stuff he takes, okay, yeah, he can carry more, but it's going to slow him down as well. So does he want to be a fast, light troop who carries maybe only like one gun and a backup pistol, or does he want to be like a heavy support character who's going to take a big gun, big armor, and you know he's going to be sitting behind the lines, but he's there to, you know, he can take a hit and turn around, and that kind of balances his slow maneuverability as he can take that extra hit. So I don't know, it really would change the kind of dynamic, but whenever you go forward with games, it's interesting to change things. I just think that would be one thing to bring in, and it kind of leads us nicely into our kind of infantry soldier section of this video. But what do you think about this, the idea of actually bringing in kind of customizable stats? Do you think that's overcomplicating it and that Battlefield really works now because it's quite simple, or do you think it's like a really nice technical thing that would allow people to customize more and provide perhaps more interesting dynamic gameplay?
I think it's very easy to do from a technical perspective. There are a number of games that have done it. Call of Duty is one that you mentioned. The recent Medal of Honor Warfighter game did it as well. Even going back several years ago to Team Fortress 2, the different character classes have different properties in terms of how much health they have and how fast they go. But the real problem with this kind of dynamic that you implement into a given game is the balancing aspect of it, which is not a technical issue. It's more of a issue of really figuring out when you change the damage of one gun or change the properties of one class, what secondary effects does it have on everything else. Yeah. And Team Fortress 2 has done a real good job at that. But as you mentioned, Call of Duty didn't do that good of a job. There was a lot of negative reaction to the Juggernaut class, for right or wrong, because of its perceived imbalance.
Yeah, it was perception more than anything. Yeah. So no, go on.
I have no problem with that. I like the idea of it. I mean, when you look at, for instance, Humvee gunners in real life, they're armored to the teeth. They got class 4 protective plates on their body armor. They have blast helmets. They have face shields. They're ready to take a few hits and still go. Contrast that with someone who may be in a reconnaissance role. It's going to be a whole different ball game. So I like that idea, but again, balancing it is so important, and it's so difficult to do.
What about this? Rather than having it as the core mode. Okay, so while we've been talking about this, obviously people are thinking that's just going to be like the default way that you would play. So you bring in all these stat systems and it gets very complicated, and some people don't want that. Some people want to just be able to pick a gun, get in a game and play. Now, what about this? What about if this system applied but to the hardcore game mode? I think this would make a lot more sense, because right now we have the core and hardcore game modes. Call it what you will. Right now in the core mode of Battlefield you can spot targets, you can see things, etc, etc. The only difference with hardcore is that you take a bit more damage when you're in vehicles, you only have the internal view and you can't spot targets, blah blah blah, and minimaps, etc. So there's a few subtle differences. What about with the next game? You really take it forward. It's a real choice when you play. Do you want to play a core mode, which is more, let's say, arcade? Okay, it's a little bit simpler, it's a little bit easier, it's a bit more about getting in the game, run and gun, you really get in the mix. And then hardcore for the much more serious player who really wants to, he knows his character is going to take a much higher rate of fire. If he takes a sniper kill, he's going down. It's a lot more dangerous. You really have to think about what you're doing. You really have to think about, okay, am I going to risk running light? Do I want to take that extra armor because I need that survivability? I like the idea of making hard, because currently I have to say, whenever people say to me, "Oh, Luetin, you never play hardcore," I'm just kind of like, well, it's just because for the most part it's not hugely different. I have played it. I've played it on Bad Company 2. I've played it in this game mode, and what I tend to find is you have a team of snipers just picking each other off, and and the battles that you do get into are over too quickly or whatever. But it's a game mode I should play more, to be honest. But I like the idea of making it significantly different, not just these little tweaks, but make it kind of a really individual game. So when people pick up the title, they know they actually have two quite strong differences to choose between. So if you want to play more seriously, if you want to really build a loadout that's going to tailor you as a really individual soldier, then yeah, you can go play hardcore. It's for that kind of style of play. If you want a more kind of quick, fast, easy game where you can just pick up weapons, get in with your team, you've got the kind of the designated targets, etc, then you can just run and go with that. I think that's kind of an interesting way. I think that would be the best way to implement it, because I actually like the kind of core mode of Battlefield right now. I like the way it plays. I think that adding this system to that would overcomplicate it, and it'd probably turn a lot of people off. But I think if you added it to the hardcore game mode, I think that the people that play hardcore, I think the kind of mentality behind that, I think would really work well. And I think I like the idea of having a really significant difference between the two. What do you think about
that? Well, philosophically, I take issue with the idea that you would have another set of variables in hardcore versus the traditional game mode, only because from a resource perspective, it would force the developers to focus on balancing on one versus the other.
Yeah, it would be complicated, but I do think it would be if you were going to do it, it would be the best way to do it in my mind, because I think otherwise you could potentially damage what is a fairly well running system already, and
yeah, you would. I would personally rather see it be implemented everywhere and have it done so it's intuitive and fun and engaging, and as opposed to just doing one versus the other. That's my opinion of it, because I for one would like to see these kind of elements incorporated into it. But to what I said earlier, there is very few titles that have done it successfully, and from a more practical perspective, I'd rather not see it done at all than to have it done in one game mode versus the other, because it only creates more contrast between those two communities. And I have for a while had reservations over the fact that we have these sort of separate communities, very much like how there are separate communities within Conquest versus Rush players. I, for one, don't play much Rush. For every 100 hours that I have played a Conquest game mode, I have played a Rush game mode.
There's got to be definitely the opposite for me, It's a good balance between the two. But yeah, I mean, I think it would be really interesting to have into the game this idea of having all the stats stuff. But again, I do agree. I like Battlefield as it is right now. I don't have any, this isn't like, I feel like, oh man, the game, it's just tedious. It needs something. No, I really like Battlefield as it is. I think it works very well. And it is interesting, this idea of, how many variables there are when it comes to these kind of things. As soon as you introduce any small element, the amount of kind of variation in balance between all the other pieces of equipment that you already have is great, it's significant. So to start introducing loads of other details and dynamics is going to make it significantly more complicated. You're going to have hundreds, thousands of permutations of how these different pieces of equipment would interact with each other. Don't underestimate, it's extremely complicated, the amount of different things that can work. It's why balancing a game is so hard. It's why you find when a new game gets released, despite as much testing as they can do, there are going to be weapons that are overpowered. There are going to be glitches that occur between weapons and things interacting with one another. It's just the way it is.
Well, I think you're right. Balancing really is the most important aspect of this. If they can get the balancing right, then I think it creates a lot of success for the game, and it allows us to add a lot more things to it. But as you mentioned, as you add more variables into it, it becomes a whole lot more difficult.
Yeah.
But going on to the gadgets, one thing that I'd like to see in a future Battlefield title is sort of a small fixed-wing unmanned aerial vehicle that could provide small areas of 2D or even 3D spotting in a given flight path. Because unlike an MAV that simply floats up in the air and can see things, a fixed-wing UAV that has little wings and a propeller takes a given flight path and circles around a few times. And I like the idea that you can only see, you'll only get intelligence out of that given flight path or the little radius around that flight path for that small amount of time. I really like that idea because then it provides the recon class or comparable recon class another way of gathering information. It's not just about putting an MAV up and having to guide it around and things like that.
Do you think the MAV should be in Battlefield 4? Do you think it can be kind of a frustrating... I mean, there's the whole issue of killing people with the MAV, let's put that to one side, but the whole thing of literally having to stay in it manned and you have to fly around, it basically takes you out of the game. Now, it can be useful, you can use it as a commanding tool if you have the ability to do that, but MAVs on the whole can be a kind of a frustration. They do also have the kind of motion, the sensor thing where you can drop them on the ground. It kind of annoys me a little bit because I don't see why they have that, because people always, you say, oh, you put a tugs down, and guys are like, well, why did you not just use an MAV, and then you've got it if you want to take it in the air as well, and you're kind of like, yeah, that's true, so why did they put the tugs in at all if you can just use an MAV? So I don't know, I kind of get irritated by the MAVs flying around, and I like the idea of having these other things that are slightly different. I think that's something that I would like to see as a little change.
There needs to be some differentiation between what the abilities can do, and I think that further differentiating the tugs versus the MAV would be one way to further differentiate Battlefield 3, but for future Battlefield titles, a fixed-wing UAV where essentially you throw it and then you don't have to guide around. You can guide around if you want to guide around, but it's going to take a flight path and you don't have to man it while it's flying around. It still gives you some degree of intelligence, be it 2D or 3D spot, whatever it may be, then that's a good thing. I think by providing these kind of different types of abilities to the different classes that are all viable, then I think that can do it. Now, I'm not saying that this UAV should be unstoppable. If it's in the air and you see it and you can get some long-distance shots on it, then great, and you can take it out. But at the same time, I like the idea of adding more relevancy to the classes and adding more viability to the classes, because currently recon and support class aren't nearly as viable compared to other classes out there, and that needs to change. Then you'll all be balanced in the sense of being in terms of viability.
Yeah, it's definitely true. I mean, we don't need to get into the details of it, but we all know right now that assault and engineer, the majority of the time, just have more roles, more situations that they can be useful in compared to support and recon. Now, it's not that support and recon don't have a role to play, they just have less of a role to play compared to assault and engineer. So I think that is something that could be addressed. I would like to see some differences in terms of what those classes could do. I really feel that the recon role should be played up a little bit more. The kind of intelligence gathering systems could be played up a bit more. And you might remember from Bad Company 2, there was the kind of specialist, or was it Bad Company 1? But they had like the specialist role, which they kind of took out, and the specialist was kind of, it was like a special forces class, you had sort of silence.
Yes, I remember that quite well.
Yeah.
Also in Battlefield 2.
Yeah, exactly. So it's something that's been around in Battlefield for a while. I would prefer to sort of see that back in one variation or another. Would it replace a class? Would it be a fifth class? So we kind of differentiate a little bit there. I mean, obviously assault has its own role. Maybe they could tweak the classes even more to make them more specific, or maybe they could amalgamate it into other things, I don't know. But I like the idea of having a more kind of specialised role there, and I like the idea that of taking the recon role and giving it these extra tools, so it really does maximise the kind of recon aspect. Something that we can talk about while we're talking about recon was rangefinders. Now, when people are working and operating as snipers, now we talked a little bit about how people work sniping in reality compared to in the game. We were talking about how at different ranges people are going to be able to work differently. So if it's around sort of, what were we saying, 300 yards, people may be able to estimate that distance, but when you start getting to ranges more like 800 to 1,000 yards, it's going to be very difficult to estimate that distance, and you know, people are going to be working with different technologies to help them find these things. And the idea that we were talking about was this rangefinder. Now bear in mind that it would be a piece of equipment, it would be a gadget that you have to select, so you're sacrificing something else to take this rangefinder. And the idea with the rangefinder, it would be for people who are not so good at estimating distance on these longer ranges. And what it would do is basically bounce a laser off of a whatever you wanted to, so maybe it actually had a control that you could click, okay? So maybe you click and it bounces like a ping back, and then it would tell you the distance and maybe even mark it onto your optic. Now what do you think about that, daskro, in terms of how it would actually work in game? Would that be a little bit too overpowered? Would it make it a bit too easy for people? Would it kind of take away the skill that people like to kind of build up personally as a sniper role in the game?
It may, but as long as it isn't simply an aimbot, then I think it could work out just fine. I like this idea that you could, if there's a certain range and you really need to make a shot and you don't want to give away your location, yes, to try to, you know, fire then correct, get the rangefinder out, get the lock on what that range is. Now, if you know intuitively what that range is, then you can look in your little reticle on your scope and say, okay, I need to go so many clicks down and so many clicks left or right, whatever it may be. If you want to do windage, windage isn't that big of a deal. And then with the rangefinder, let's say, for instance, that when you look in your same reticle after you find the range, that it highlights the given reticle dot that you need to look at in order to hit that shot, like a little horizontal line that shows up and say you need to compensate by aiming here instead of where the crosshair actually is. Yeah. And I think if you were to do that and also make the range finding tool itself maybe take 5 seconds, 10, a certain amount of time in order to get a lock on to get that appropriate range. Yeah. I think you can balance it that way. And plus, it allows people to start to use that tool and say, okay, it's 300 meters out. And the next time they do it, they say, well, I think it may be 250 meters out. And they do it, okay, well, it's 275. And it allows them to build up this intuitive skill of what the range really is. And so at some point, they don't even have to use the rangefinder anymore because they feel good about their skill. This provides an incremental ability for people to get better. And I think that's a good thing. Yeah, I think the best way to do it would be, as you say, have a kind of calculation time, so when you bounce it back, it's going to tell you that range. It's not going to be like you bounce it off a target and it instantly tells you where to put that dot onto. It's just giving you a general idea of the distance you're going to have to be firing at. So let's say you're on Caspian border, you're up on the rocks, the guys are way down in the distance down at the base, you're not quite sure about that range, so you ping it off a building and then you go, okay, it's roughly about this distance. Again, bear in mind as well, when you're actually in game at distance, right, unless that target is completely stationary, it's going to be moving around, so you're still going to have to estimate anyway if you want to be accurate. Right, let's move on to another one. This is another one of mine. It was a kind of an adaptation of the sensor balls. Now, in Bad Company 2, we had the sensor balls, which Recon had, and what they could do is throw these balls, and they would kind of emit like a kind of a sort of movement detection around a localized area. And if there were any enemy close to the sensor ball, and you could hear it beeping, it would be like beep, 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 and anyone in that area would get marked, basically. Now, this was a slight adaptation on that tool. There was a limitation with the sensor balls, and sometimes it was a little bit unfair. Someone would be in a very well concealed position, they might not even be moving, but a sensor ball comes bouncing near to you and all of a sudden you're marked, and it can be kind of annoying sometimes. The sensor balls wouldn't be sensor balls as such, they're more kind of camera balls, and this is actually an existing technology as well. What it is it's a small device which you throw into a building, round a corner, into a window, whatever.
it's bottom weighted, so it's got a weight in the base, so even though it may roll over and over when it lands, it will always kind of go towards the weight. Imagine like one of those toys for children where it has a weight below and it kind of, you know, rocks on the base. So the idea is as it lands, it would roll over onto its base, and then what it has it mounted in it is a 360-degree camera system, so it just moves around. Now, as I say, this is actually an existing technology, so I haven't simply gone, oh, the camera spike in COD Black Ops, that was cool, maybe we could do that for Battlefield. No, this actually is a real thing that you can use. And the idea is that you may throw it into a location where you don't know what the situation is. So maybe there's a building, you want to make sure that it's clear, or you want to get in there, you know there's a squad up there, but how many guys are there? How well equipped are they? So you throw this thing up in there, and it shows, it would come up on your screen as a little square window, the same as it has done in other games, and you can get a literal image. Now this is something that we can do in games, we know it's been done in other games, so it's not something that's unreasonable that couldn't be done. The idea that I like about this little camera is that it would be the kind of thing you could use in multiple situations, alright? So it's not something that you could just use for buildings. You could drop it somewhere on the battlefield, you could put it on top of a building, you could put it on a road, you could throw it near a bush, you know, no enemy's going to see it, it wouldn't be beeping and flashing, it's just going to be a little device that's down there. And then it means that, for example, you as a soldier, you could be over at, say, an AMCOM or an A base, you could leave your little camera somewhere else, maybe mounted on, you could drop it on a building or whatever, maybe it would be visible. I think to keep it balanced, it would have to kind of be, you know, some kind of obviousness, I think, to make it clear. Otherwise it'd be a little bit unfair to have a kind of constant camera running. Another sort of way I thought of balancing it would be to kind of have it a certain time period. So maybe it has a limited battery life or something of only a few minutes. And I mean, obviously in reality it would have longer than that, but to keep it balanced, it only stays up for a limited period of time. But I think that'd be a kind of cool thing. Do you think that'd be a good one to be able to work into squads, give people a little bit more flexibility? I mean, something that frustrates me in game is sometimes I'm left to defend somewhere solo, the rest of my team is doing whatever the hell they're doing, and I can't watch all positions at the same time as an individual. Okay, I can't watch the left and the right and behind me all at the same time. So, you know, if I'm covering somewhere, I like the idea that I could just, you know, maybe I see these guys coming towards me down the road and then I lose sight of them. And I think, crap, I know they're around me somewhere, but I don't quite know where. So I can just drop this little thing behind me and then it keeps my back covered, so I don't have to worry about that just for the time it may take for me to get back up or something. Do you think that'd be a cool thing to roll into the game?
I think so, if you could make it intuitive and fun to use. And so to use your example, you throw it, it sticks onto something or rolls onto a certain area, and you have that vision and that very sort of almost a soda straw sort of look in a given area. I think that if you were guarding a given point or in a given scenario, I like to have like a picture-in-picture kind of deal when you're playing the game.
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
So next to your mini maps, you'd see like a little gray, black and white kind of screen that would have a little mini picture of what your camera's seeing.
Yeah.
And so it's not just you have to get out your special camera viewer tool and push a little TV and look at the TV and not see anything else. Instead, you see it on your screen. You get that ability. That's not true of real life, but you know what? That's okay. As long as it's intuitive and it's fun and adds a new dimension to it.
The key to it as well would be that it has, as I say, and this is how it actually works in reality, is it has a 360-degree rotating camera in it. So it's not like the camera spike in COD where they just drop it and it shows a static stationary image forward. When you would drop this thing down, it constantly rotates. So you may actually lose sight of a certain position for a moment or two, but that is backed up by the benefit that it's constantly moving around. So rather than just looking at one place, you will get a constant little rotation of everything. So you might be able to see 3, 4, 5, 6 positions rather than one. The downside with it is you will have a black spot whilst that thing is moving around. So I think that kind of in its own way kind of balance, it gives you a benefit and a kind of, you know, balance there at the same time. Let's just go on to the very last thing, unless you've got one other topic after this, daskro. My last thing was kind of 2 water-based things. I'm going to leave one of my mine things out. Right now we have landmines, what we can use for anti-vehicle. I really like the idea of having water-based mines, little floating mines, little things. Maybe they come as kind of more little spheres, and rather than placing them on the ground, you literally have to throw them, and then they stay kind of floating in the water. This would help to prevent flanking boats, vehicles. It could prevent LAVs, Amtraks. It may not take them out in one go, but it's going to do them a bit of damage, maybe take like 20% off of them or something like that. So I like the idea of having some water-based mines. In general, I would like to see a bit more kind of aquatic warfare in Battlefield 4. I think it's something that's neglected quite a lot, and I really would like to see a little bit more of that. And combined with that, I really would kind of be interested to see in this idea of having more water-based combat, having the ability to have a scuba option for your character that allows you to stay underwater for a few minutes at a time. The purpose of this would be to approach, for example, heavily locked down positions by stealth. So think of, for example, the canals, or even take the first base on Operation Metro, where you have the lake on the right hand side there. And hopefully in Battlefield 4 we'd see some maps that focus on this kind of thing. Also imagine the scene where you have to approach a base with a helicopter, and as you're approaching an area, 2 to 3 players drop out of that helicopter and they jump straight into the water, straight under the water, and then they have the ability to approach. It could be a bit of a game changer when it comes to thinking about the different situations that you're getting locked down by. And who knows, you could even end up with like James Bond situations where you have like 5-6 guys underwater having spear gun fights. Who knows how far we want to go with it? I don't know. But
yeah, I'd like different approaches to the game, where you want to go underwater, or whether you want to take boats and have to worry about sea mines and things like that. A lot of different possibilities there, and they don't necessarily have to be incorporated in every map. They can be map specific. That's okay. Sure. Just like there's only Amtraks in certain maps and only Venoms in certain maps. I like the idea of having different possibilities.
Okay, so I think we've covered quite a lot there today. Have you managed to cover everything you wanted to get through, daskro?
I have, and I think that in this hour-long conversation, we've covered a broad range of topics, and I want to voice my appreciation to you, Luetin, for hosting me in this fun conversation.
Yeah, thanks, man. It's been really good, and we want to hear your thoughts about what you think about this. A lot of this stuff is speculative, guys, so, you know, we're just kind of bouncing ideas around here. Don't think that anything we say is kind of set in stone and we think that this is the way the game should be from now on. It's not really the case. We're just having some fun here. We're just thinking about different ways the game could work. Would it work? Would it not work? I mean, whenever I'm thinking about ideas, I'm as interested in how badly things wouldn't work, just as much as I think that they would be good for the game. So I'm going to timestamp everything here. If you've managed to get to the end here, you will already know that. But, you know, let us know what you think about some of these individual situations, thinking about aircraft countermeasures, individual personnel items, gadgets, and different devices for the game. I want to thank daskro for joining me today, guys, and I'll see you very soon for some more Battlefield 3.
And that's the end of the dialogue. I hope you guys enjoyed. I'm not going to cut it off just yet. I want to finish up this round, so here you go. The objective has been taken. Okay, I see you, little fella. Yeah,